You're listening to Overdoing It, the Rhode Island Library Podcast. Hello, and welcome to our first episode of Overdoing It, where our team of library workers dish about their latest reads, views, and passions, along with fascinating conversations with local luminaries. I'm Tayla, the branch librarian at the Oaklawn Branch Library in Cranston, and my pronouns are she, her. Let's dive in and meet the rest of our Overdoing It team.
I'm Emily Goodman, Adult Services Coordinator at the Office of Library and Information Services, and my pronouns are she, her.
I'm Dave Bartos. I'm the Coordinator of Adult Services at the Cranston Public Library in Cranston, Rhode Island, and my pronouns are he, him.
And I'm Lauren Walker, Director at Coventry Public Library, and my pronouns are she, her.
All right. So a little bit later in the show, we will talk about all the details about our new project, Overdoing It. But before we get into that, let's start off with, what have you been reading?
I just finished the first in a trilogy by Ann Leckie called Ancillary Justice, that by the time I got about halfway through that book, I loved it so much. I finished it in the middle of the night, and I immediately, even though I'm not an ebook reader, I immediately downloaded the ebook from Libby at my local library. And I had to start the next book. My hold was already in for the second book, but it wasn't in my sweaty little hands. And so I had to keep reading. So the premise is, it's a story told in alternating chapters, the present and then 20 years ago. The main character is Breck. She is a soldier, kind of alone, seems to be looking for someone on this frozen planet, and comes across somebody that she knew 1,000 years ago. This person's lying in the snow, clearly has been assaulted. And so now there's this mystery of who is this person? What do you mean 1,000 years ago? And then this isn't a spoiler because it's the second chapter and it's also on the back of the book. It's a flashback to 20 years previous, when Breck was the Justice of Torin. So Breck was a literal troop ship with thousands of ancillaries, human bodies that the ship also controlled. So it turns out that this main character is an AI that used to have this very multi-bodied experience of being like a spaceship and all of these bodies that were under its control, like how we have a hand with fingers on it and everything worked as a single being. And then so an additional mystery of Breck in the present all by herself and has no, something happened. And it was so perfectly paced. What I loved about this book is there was all this mystery, and there were points where you're like, I don't know what just happened. The author, Ann Leckie, intentionally was held some back. And then when all of the kind of secrets came out and you realized what was happening, you're like, okay, I'm fully invested in this. The world building was so perfect. And it was just the perfect building of suspense. It's I don't know what's happening. And then 5 or 6 chapters later, you're like, oh my God, that's what happened. And now it all makes sense. And so that was just a fantastic book. It won every single sci-fi award in 2014. And it's easy to see why. Everybody knows it's fantastic, but I really, really enjoyed that book.
I love stories like that reveal things in that way.
Yes.
Sounds really good. I right now am rereading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn because I haven't read it since high school.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you guys have heard about James,
Yes.
the new book that's coming out by Percival Everett, which is Huckleberry Finn from Jim's point of view. And it sounds really interesting, but I was I haven't read Huck Finn since high school, so I should probably reread that to have more context for this new book. So I'm reading it. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
I love Mark Twain and his satire, and also getting angry about book banners while I'm reading it.
Yeah, right.
Because I'm you just don't understand. The whole point of the book is that it's supposed to be upsetting.
Right.
Yeah, I'm enjoying that, but also being fueled by rage while I read it.
Right. You want to have people have 1 ounce of media literacy. It's that sometimes a story is not just what it is. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Is there anything you're taking away from it reading as an adult as opposed to a high schooler? Anything that's jumping out that seems new to you?
I mean, I don't even remember what my take was on it in high school, other than just, it's this important piece of American literature. It's iconic, and I mean, when I read it back then, I had no idea that it would be controversial because it's just a snapshot of a place and time. Like when it was written, it was contemporary. It was like any book coming out today that takes place in 2024. Like that is what the world around them was like. And so as I'm reading it, I'm just like, I can't understand why anyone wouldn't want this to be required reading, to see what the world was like, and also to see kind of Huck Finn's sort of, he has like a very naive point of view where I just finished the part in the book where he has kind of a crisis of faith where he's like, I should do the right thing in turning in Jim. But I think I'm just going to go to hell instead and help him because he's my friend. And it's just such a good way to put this moral issue out to people who at that time might be thinking similar things. Like they feel like the right thing to do is to be like pro-slavery, but they're going to go against it and be like a bad person, quote unquote, by being kind to these people. So I just think it's such a good book and so like important that people read it.
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of two books that I would like to talk about. I'm at the very beginning of both of them. So the first one, if I'm allowed to swear on this podcast, is called Bitch, On the Female of the Species by Lucy Cook. And so Lucy Cook is a zoologist, and she writes the story all about the ways in which for years and years we have not been giving due the evidence that we've seen in scientific research of females of species. So when we're looking at bird behavior, when we're looking at even but going back to Darwin, oftentimes, right, we're looking at what the male behavior is and how the dominant behaviors are what is successful. And that was very much of its time. It still is, right? We care more about patriarchal and sort of toxic masculinity and those things as being like powerful. But in many species, we actually see that the females are exhibiting those behaviors even when we're not seeing it in the males, and that females are really driving evolution of species. And so it is all about the dismissed, hidden, or unfunded research of females of species. So really cool book. And then the other one, past Rhody Radio Recommends listeners may remember me talking about how excited I was for Emily Henry's new book, Funny Story.
Yeah.
So that dropped last month, and I've been listening to it. It's about a children's librarian who moves to the Midwest with her fiance to like his hometown, and they buy a house. And shortly before the marriage, he calls it off to go be with his like longtime female best friend. And then they announce their marriage like couple months later. So the children's librarian main character, doesn't really have anywhere to go, ends up living with the now ex-fiance's new fiance's ex-boyfriend, and they both get invited to the wedding. This is not much of a spoiler alert. I'm only 13% of this audiobook. They both get invited to the wedding, and on a drunken night, they decide to RSVP yes. So they're going to go to the wedding together. And if you know Emily Henry, she's a romance novelist. So, of course, there's going to be a romantic endeavor probably between these two characters as they, make their way to this wedding. So really excited for both of those.
My first reactions there was, I was like, yes, RSVP yes to the wedding, and then ruin the wedding. And then I was like, wow, Tayla, that's not very nice.
Say yes to the mess.
So then there was like, okay, but like the best revenge is enjoying your life, right? So I was like, okay, RSVP yes to the wedding, have a wonderful time, and like act like you aren't even bothered. So yeah, I don't know if you got to that part yet, but that's what I think they should do.
Well, they're going to go.
Okay.
As boyfriend and girlfriend, because that's what they've pitched to the ex-fiance, who called her, right, and is like, oh, we just want to make sure that you're going to be coming. Like, you don't have to come. I was like, well, why would you send me an invite if you didn't think that I should come?
Yeah.
Suspicious.
I have a feeling it's all going to work out in the end.
You do? It's not going to be super sloppy like Tayla wants it to be? That would be fun.
No, but then I was like, don't be super sloppy.
Did any of you read Dial A for Aunties?
No.
It's sort of it's not really a rom-com. It's like a modern mystery comedy where like this woman is it at a wedding? It's at some function, and like a guy turns up dead, and but they can't let anybody know because it'll like ruin the event, and so she calls in all of her aunties to come help like cover up this disaster so that the day does not get ruined by this mishap. And it is hilarious, and that would be a great sort of oh, am I going to spoil it? A good crossover between these two storylines.
Yeah, there's a whole series of them now, and it's like, you know,
oh,
definitely riffing on my favorite thing about the romance novel genre and kind of like the cozy mystery genre is the punny titles. And so like, you know, Dial A for Aunties is very much like, you know, oh, you remember, you know, Dial A for Alibi, or, you know, like, you know, and they're all kind of in that vein. Four Aunties in a Wedding, The Good, the Bad, and the Aunties. It's perfect. It's perfect. It's perfect.
a deep well.
Yeah, they can keep going. I will buy every one of them. There's a new one coming out that we just bought. It's Hot Earl Summer. And it's like, you know, the Earl Who Loved Me sort of romance novel bodice ripper. And I'm just like, Hot Earl Summer, that's really good. I wish I'd thought of that.
That's coming out at a perfect time because like there's all this hype about season 3 for Bridgerton.
Yeah.
So I feel like everyone is in their Regency romance era.
They're in their Regency era. And that's you said it. You got it.
Listen, there's also, have we talked about this before?
No, it's our first episode.
She says like this is not our first episode. There's sort of a Latin American equivalent cozy mystery, like modern cozy mystery, called Arsenic and Adobo.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent book and series, and similar like fun riffy title.
Yeah. I love
Dave,
it.
are you also a romance fan?
No, I've never read a romance novel. I do, however, buy all the books for the library. And so getting to read the titles and, you know, love them. It is on my list of things to try because there's no reason I haven't, except that I haven't. I do lean towards reading sci-fi fantasy. But yeah, love a punny title.
Same.
The punnier, the better. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like if that could be my job to come up with punny titles, I might like romance novels better.
Yes.
I did pick a rom-com for one of my book groups, so I can confidently say that I read it and felt the same as I do about rom-com movies, which is that I'm sure like some of them are good, but I did not love it.
Yeah.
Which did you pick for your book club?
We read The Matzo Ball.
Oh, yeah.
I've never
Gene
heard of
Meltzer.
that.
I bought that one too.
It is a Hanukkah-themed rom-com where basically the main character is a romance book writer who writes Christmas romances.
Nice.
But she's Jewish, and her father is a rabbi. So she has not told her family that she writes these Christmas romance novels. They don't know that she does that for a living.
Nice.
And then her childhood crush comes back into her life. He's throwing this event called the Matzo Ball, which is like a Christmas Eve party for Jewish people because all their friends are off doing Christmas Eve things. And that's the story. I don't want to give it all away, although everyone knows how it's going to end. But yeah, I don't know. It was just a bit cheesy for me. But there's also a chronic illness component to it, which I will say I appreciated. That, you know, anytime you can shine a light on a chronic illness is always nice.
Yeah.
I feel like choosing a Christmas holiday rom-com for your rom-com romance introduction is like cheese factor on cheese factor. You really like double down. But also one of her other books, the same author, is Kissing Kosher, and I am obsessed with that.
That is also a great title, yeah. And Lauren, just so you don't feel left out, I have only just started to like dip my toe into romance. I would not call myself a veteran romance reader. Just the one. And mostly just into Fourth Wing. Which we won't get sidetracked.
Felt like last time.
CranstonLibrary.org/downtime. We did it.
It was like 5 or 6 episodes in there, yeah.
The romantasy allowed me to get in because of all the fantasy parts of it. Because that's like a very familiar thing for me.
Yeah.
I did start reading Gwen and Art Aren't in Love, which is not fantasy, but it's YA historical romance. the main character, Gwen, her parents are the king and queen of England, and her brother is the firstborn. So he is the heir to the throne. And she has been raised her whole life knowing that she was betrothed to this young man named Arthur from a family that had helped them out politically. So to like seal that political alliance when they both were babies, they like made an agreement that they were going to get married.
The good old days. You helped me out. Here's my daughter.
Yeah. And I don't think this is too much of a spoiler because the title does say that they aren't in love. But like, oops, both of the kids who you agreed to marry each other, both super gay. So Gwen, she is like crushing on this one lady knight. Art is just having his own dalliances with men in secret. And so they kind of, where I got to it, they kind of had a mutual agreement of like, I won't tell anyone you're a big fat lesbian if you don't tell anyone that I sneak out all the time to go to bars and drink and participate in debauchery. And that's kind of where I got with it. So I guess it still isn't straight up and down like modern romance, but it feels more romance novel than Fourth Wing is because the main focus is kind of like the fake relationship and then their actual interests and things like that.
Is it based on like King Arthur or just the names are the same?
Yeah, so Arthur is named after King Arthur because his family was kind of in a camp of people that were like really into the whole legend and believed that a lot of the like magic and superstitions around that whole legend were true. King Arthur is not contemporary. It's not like set during King Arthur's court. It's like years later, but yeah, that flavor is supposed to be there.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't with the romance. Okay, we're going to indulge me 1 second, and then we can move on from this. A little bit older, but if you're looking for like a historical fiction, queer romance, Mackenzie Lee's The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, which has been around since 2017, is right up that alley. It's sort of like older brother. He's got a younger sister who then also gets her own book. But he is sort of just like supposed to inherit the throne, but is too young and reckless. And so he goes on one last like abroad trip to travel Europe with his best friend and his sister. And he's got a secret crush on the best friend. And so he's like, I'm just going to do it up European style and just be like, as Goodreads said, you know, his hedonistic romp around Europe. But then as history goes awry, kind of has some dangerous encounters with people he kind of like gets a little bit too far in, and they all have to figure out how to navigate kind of some of the more dangerous things that he gets involved with. But it's also a romance, and I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads way back when. So did a couple of my friends who don't really read romance, and so if that sounds intriguing to you, we love a Mackenzie Lee story.
There you go.
Yeah, that's probably been on my to-read list since it came out. All right, well, before we fall down a further romance novel rabbit hole, have you all been watching anything interesting lately?
So my husband and I just got into Cheers.
I had a Cheers time in my life too. How's it going?
Like, it's definitely been on maybe when I like fell asleep watching TV and woke back up and Cheers was on. But aside from that, I've never actually like watched it before. We're loving it.
Yeah.
I mean, some of these one-liners are really gold. Some episodes could be a little more modern with the subject matter. Some of the episodes are like, all right, we don't need this one anymore. But for the most part, yeah, we're really enjoying Cheers. So nothing heavy on our plate right now. We just want to go where everybody knows our names.
That's right.
But Lauren, I think it's interesting that you bring up the fact about some of the episodes not aging very well, because I feel like that is what stops me from watching a lot of these older sitcoms.
Yeah.
Because there's part of me that's like, I should watch this older sitcom so I understand all the things that people who are older than me understand the references to. But then I stop because I'm like, yeah, but am I going to think it's gross because like when Gen Z decided that Friends was cool again, I was like, yeah, but everything I've heard about this show is that it's like super homophobic a lot of the time. And I just didn't need that in my life.
Yeah.
I'm struggling to think. I'm sure there is, because that was just like so embedded in a lot of stuff. And that's what I refer to mostly when I'm talking about Cheers. But I will say, like, one of the first episodes of Cheers, I can't remember if it's one of the main characters or someone who comes into the bar, but they say like they're having a really hard time because their son just came out and they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And I think it was someone who came into the bar, and the bartender was just like, do you love your son? And he was like, yeah. And he was like, do you want him to be in your life? And he was like, yeah. And he was like, then that's all you need to know. Like, what more are you going to do? And I was like, wow, for like 1989 or whatever, like that was pretty good.
Yeah.
But then there are some times where it's not so great. Sam and Diane are like the main two characters who have their on again, off again. We just watched an episode where they were like slapping each other in the face back and forth. And it was just like, okay, but do we really need him to be slapping her in the face? And then she was like, you hit me. And he was like, not that hard. And I was like, oh my God, like, let's just cut that. Let's just cut that out of my memory and move on. But yeah, that's like, I would say one segment out of every 5 episodes, there's something that I kind of cringe at. For the most part, it's just snappy one-liners and 80s hair.
Similarly, so I am just like constantly rewatching things. I can't remember right now anything that I'm watching that's new, but call me crazy. When I leave my dog, particularly in the middle of the day on the weekend or in the evening when I think people might be going in and out of our building, he watches TV. I have a whole Netflix account for him. And so generally he watches Grey's Anatomy or Seinfeld, depending on like what I think the mood is of the time. But I recently decided Netflix just took on Reba.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember watching Reba when I was like in high school or whatever, when it was on just like reruns on TV. And so I was like, oh, that's like another fun, like it's got a lot of seasons. We'll put Reba on for the dog. And I sat through the first half of the first episode before I left him the other day. And oof. Like I wouldn't have told you that Reba was unproblematic from my memory, but also having to rewatch like the very first episode where they're really getting into their situation. It is just, it's a good thing that he doesn't understand full human English, or I'd feel a lot worse about putting it on. I probably should feel bad about like giving it money through Netflix. Not that I think Seinfeld is really like, is it less problematic? I don't know.
Well, I used to play Gilmore Girls sometimes for our dog when we left the house. So if you would rather have your dog absorb some like entertaining, albeit toxic mother-daughter relationship antics, there you go.
I can't believe that you don't know this about me, Lauren. I am constantly rewatching Gilmore Girls.
I do know that. You did say that.
So he's already got it thanks to me and my falling asleep.
There you go.
And yeah, there are a lot of moments in Gilmore Girls. Not only is like there are a lot of problems with a lot of the characters, there are a lot of moments where you're just like, oof, not okay. But I let Gilmore Girls slide because it is just like, it's white noise to me at this point. I don't really even need to know what episode I'm on.
That's fair.
Yeah.
You just know by which boyfriend is
exactly.
happening.
Yeah, well, I think it's always a good thing to watch older things and be like, wow, it's good that I think collectively, generally speaking, realize that this wasn't the greatest or that wasn't the greatest. I think I used to be the kind of person who would call the radio and try and win stuff. And so,
that's awesome.
And so one of the things that I called the radio and won was like a DVD set of Warner Brothers cartoons. And I was like, oh, that's cool, because I was the kid who grew up in the 80s watching literally 4 hours of Looney Tunes on Saturday mornings. And like you put it on and there's at the very beginning, it's just like there's depictions in here that were inappropriate then and they're inappropriate now, but we're not going to like erase them because it's important to acknowledge that this happened. And I think that was the first time, like the early 2000s, where I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And then you watch it and it's like, Bugs Bunny doing blackface or something. That's like, oh yeah, okay. Like I get it. And it's kind of, it's good to have a little bit of context to appreciate is the wrong word, but to kind of like, what's opera doc is still the best cartoon to ever be made. It is perfect. It pokes fun at all the fun Wagner things, speaking as a recovering classical musician. But there is also like, there was just this stuff that was like, acceptable at the time, and to realize like there were people that were upset about it then who didn't have the opportunity to voice that upsetness, and now we have an opportunity to say like, well, we did that and that kind of sucked, right? And to enjoy the parts of Cheers that are like, this is really funny, like Ted Danson, incredibly funny, charming person, why wouldn't I want to watch him be a recovering alcoholic who works at a bar? That's interesting. and but also to be like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that, or having to reckon with that, I think is important, like a little media literacy. Like you don't just take these things in and be like, well, that means exactly that. No, it's like, you have to watch it and kind of like think about what stuff means. And, not to the point that it's not fun and you have to write a dissertation unless you're into that. But certainly like, it's good to grapple with some things and be like, I like this part of Cheers. I didn't like this part of Cheers. I'll watch What's Opera Doc. I'm not going to watch, I don't know, pick another one. And I think that's a good thing, to show growth. We've all kind of grown a little bit and hopefully continue to grow. And then you look at the things our kids are watching now, like Steven Universe, or what did my kids really love? Gravity Falls, like all of these things that I think they have a lot of values that we wish we had then to a certain extent. But all of the cartoons when I was growing up were either racist or trying to sell me stuff. Right.
Yeah. And also like as a self-proclaimed history nerd, like there's also an element of, even though we don't like to think of like something from like the 80s or 90s as being history, like it is. And the show came out and it was extremely popular and people sat down to watch it every week. And so it's a really good indication of at least like, I don't know, maybe the white American mind at the time. Like if you're gonna, like that's what people thought was acceptable and funny and talked about when they went into work the next day and that kind of thing. And so when you see something in the show that we now are cringing at, you can at least just say like, okay, now I understand a little bit more of like what it was like in that time to be alive, to be talking to people, to be, Black or gay, like and I watch a lot of like older movies and older shows too, which can be so problematic. And it's, you have to, in order to be able to enjoy it, you have to remember like that it shows you what was maybe seen as acceptable generally, because obviously there were people who didn't like it and there were people who did like it. Generally, it was acceptable enough that people gave it money and thought it would do well, So there's also that element of like, just remember that it was a different time and now you know a little bit more about the 80s and the 90s.
Right.
And I think it's a really interesting example of that has carried through is The Simpsons. So like I think a lot of people now think about The Simpsons as sort of being maybe satirically progressive. I see a lot of comments on social media like, Certified Meme Collector, I see a lot of things that are like, oh, The Simpsons called it like so long ago. They had this like commentary about some political thing or whatever, and now here we are seeing it happen in Lifetime, like as The Simpsons predicted. Yeah. And so I think a lot of people think of The Simpsons now as progressive, but I went back a couple of years ago to try to watch The Simpsons from the beginning because I remember watching it as a kid on TV, and I've stopped. I don't watch it now. So to be fair, I am like talking about The Simpsons. I don't really know, but it has lasted. They're still making new episodes now. But the beginning episodes of The Simpsons are tough. Yeah. And like, Homer Simpson's this like alcoholic dad that's totally disinterested in his kids and like spanks his kids, which some people, I think rightfully so, kind of label abuse. And so like we see that and it is so normalized, right? And it's been such a part of our culture. And I think The Simpsons really sort of were a mirror to a very common sort of white American experience, and maybe is still kind of trending that way. Maybe I'm not really sure, but to see where it came from and where it is now and how it has gone along and changed, I think throughout the years to continue to be a mirror to a certain American experience is interesting.
Yeah, I remember The Simpsons being on in my house as a kid because my stepdad really liked The Simpsons. But I kind of remember sometimes like the progressive things that they did do were almost like the joke, if that makes sense. I have a memory of the alternate opening of The Future where Lisa has two girlfriends. And so it's like not only like is Lisa lesbian, but also like participating in polyamory / what we refer to now as ethical non-monogamy. But it's hard to tell if like they were like, yeah, we're going to put it out there. Or if it was like, oh yeah, Lisa is such a like,
right.
you know, like such a progressive character, the kind of kid who's like has a very different outlook than their parents, trying to like be different than their parents' generation, like to the point that, yeah, she's a lesbian with two girlfriends.
She's one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is interesting, but we can never know the author's true intent, but that's with all things. I think we can never know the author's real true intent. We can only speculate what we think they're trying to say. But what I do remember watching, and was not a meme, is I remember them making jokes about the EPA in the Simpsons movie that came out like 15 years ago now, maybe. And I remember like in the church, and the grandfather's like, EPA, and everyone's like, what is he talking about? And then it's like, it's the EPA. There's going to be a whole problem with environmental protection or whatever. So, so yeah, it seems like frequently it was like the progressiveness was the joke, I guess was the point I was trying to get at. I lost the thread there a little bit.
No, you're fine. Yeah, and that's what I mean. Where like I haven't kept up with it, so I'm not really sure. And in my rewatch, I don't remember how far I got in, but I was just like, I don't know if I can do this, especially knowing that it's like 20 something seasons at this point of just like I'm not sure I can relive all of this. So yeah, it may be that it's not really progressive, and people just like to take clips of it and
take it and feel
label
it that way.
What they're going to label it. Yeah.
Well, Kurt Vonnegut had a whole thing, and talk about like problematic faves, like, you know, Kurt Vonnegut, very difficult human being. But in the book Mother Night, he talks about a broadcaster who is asked by the CIA to pretend to be a Nazi sympathetic broadcaster, and then like goes into Berlin and like pretends to be a Nazi so hard that he ends up being tried for being a Nazi. And the CIA is like, if you get caught, we'll disavow you. Right. And there's all this stuff. And the whole point of the book, and something I've really been thinking about, and that I think talking about 80s and 90s media, it's the idea that you become what you pretend to be. And so be careful what you pretend to be. If I pretend that, you know, being homophobic is funny and I play it for a joke, like, well, then I'm just becoming homophobic, right? And that's kind of what happened to a certain extent. It's like, well, this was acceptable. It made people laugh, and so comedians did it. And then the culture kind of did that. And I am sure, I mean, I was in middle school in the 90s, and I would guarantee I probably joined right in with the people who were laughing. And, you know, I feel terrible about that. But also it's like, I can't do better then, I can only do better now. At this point, it almost seems like The Simpsons might have gone in reverse, where they were pretending to be progressive for a joke. And now it's like, oh, now the world is more progressive, and that has caught up to them joking. And like, oh, now we actually are just doing this.
Yeah. To end on a positive note.
Yes. Take us home.
I wouldn't beat myself up too much about past you, because we can only operate with the information that we have. So once we know better, then we can do better. So during this conversation, I was thinking about, especially in terms of like queerness and the portrayal of queerness on TV, things age so quickly. Like when Lauren was talking about like, well, this is how it was in the 80s and 90s watching Cheers, I was thinking about even my parents really liked 2.5 Men when it was like on in the heyday. Yeah. And there's one episode that is like super transphobic, where I like going back to like, once you know better, you do better. I think originally when I watched it, it was like, oh, funny. But now like if repeats are on and that episode comes on, I'm like, I can't even stand it that this is on television right now. But that show's not that old.
No.
Like that show probably only ended less than 10 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. When did that happen? Time is so weird lately.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, it was popular enough in 2011 that I was part of a group that was making sweatshirts to sort of memorialize the year of like what's the thing that you're gonna like put on the sweatshirt that like 10, 15 years from now, you're going to be like, oh, classic.
So 2011.
Cool, right? And we did #winning.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nice.
For Charlie Sheen. So, yeah. And talk about problematic. Yeah.
And to bring it back to Cheers, like it's all the question of like, does this old media have anything to commend itself, or, you know, like, does this stuff get in the way, right?
Mm.
You know, there's a lot to say about it that's like unproblematic, and you have to think about a balance, right? And it's like, if the problematic squicks you out so much that it's like, I can't even enjoy what I think was funny about this. I started The Next Generation, which I watched in its original run starting in 89 because I'm an old nerd. And, you know, it's like, it's way hornier than I remember it being, which is really funny.
Oh my God, yes.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I was thinking about Star Trek too when we were having this conversation about the flip side of it being like things that were surprisingly progressive for their time. Mm-hmm. And I think Star Trek has been that way throughout all of its iterations.
Yes.
So it's funny that even things that are progressive for its time, I look back and I'm all like, wow, Captain Kirk, could women be anything besides objects to you? Like, it'll be like, this woman, she's a doctor, but her life is not complete because she is single and childless. And it's like, wow. But at the time,
right,
you know, having Uhura and Sulu on screen and being like reoccurring characters with substantial roles who were heroes of the story was extremely progressive. And I think Next Gen had very progressive things to say about queerness that still kind of resonate now. So yeah, when the problematic faves are getting you down, just remember the surprisingly progressive for its time faves.
That's right.
Okay.
All right.
So we get to talk about our new show now.
Yeah.
All right. So we are kicking off our first episode with a roundtable discussion with our new, do we want to call it a creative team? Do we want to call it an editorial board?
What do we call ourselves?
I like creative team.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
Sounds good.
Editorial board sounds so boring.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, we should have ethics. Ew.
No ethics, just creativity. I want to be problematic.
But so we wanted our first episode to be a kind of roundtable discussion, introducing people to our new show, Overdoing It. So we brought the creative team here together to talk about this new project. So I guess first, do we want to talk about if someone is coming in episode 1 of Overdoing It, having not listened to our previous projects? Do we want to talk a little bit about where we're coming from and what's happening with our past projects?
You know, I think what this opportunity does, it's bringing together 2 previous podcasts that we were all working on independently that were essentially COVID pandemic projects. And so the way I've been kind of thinking of it is like, this is a place where we're turning the page and we're turning it from a pandemic project that we've continued to do because it's fun, and we're doing a new project that is intended to be more sustainable. So Tayla and I started Downtime with Cranston Public Library in April of 2020. We were all working from home, and I can't speak for Tayla, or I won't speak for Tayla, but I was spinning my wheels for like, how do I library and, you know, work from home? And Tayla reached out and was like, I miss talking to people about what I've been reading, and they'd be asking me like, you know, what do you read? What do you know? What have you been enjoying lately? And I can't talk to those people because we're all home and our libraries are closed. And so we started Downtime with the intent to recreate those patron conversations in a podcast form. And it literally started out with, you know, what have you been reading? What have you been watching? And how have you been passing the time not doing anything? The literal, what have you been doing with your downtime? And so that was really an anchor project for me. And I think something that kept me doing stuff that felt like library work enough that I kind of made it through that. And then when we returned to our libraries, which honestly was June 2020, so it's not like we were working from home for very long, but we did continue making the podcast because, you know, the buildings were closed for a little while. Then they were kind of like sort of open, and there was this whole kind of phasing back in. I kind of blocked a lot of it out now that I start to think about it again. But you know, it kind of, we kept having these conversations with our coworkers, and then it expanded to like folks working at other libraries. And then it expanded further to like, you know, people who would normally be doing programs before we were doing programs, and, you know, community organizations. We had some authors on. It was incredible. And it really just, we kept doing it because we were having so much fun with it, is really what that came down to. But it, at the end, has always been a bit of a pandemic project and not necessarily well situated for the future. And so that's kind of what brings us to this partnership. And I should stop blabbing.
That was great.
You all can talk about Rhody Radio.
I can take it, Lauren, and then if you want to jump in at any point. So similarly, Rhody Radio started as a pandemic project, not for conversations, but for programming. So as anybody listening knows who goes to libraries, they are not just places for borrowing books or movies or video games or cake pans or anything else that you might want to take physically out of the building. We almost let you take the walls. It's fine. But we also are doing programming in our libraries, and come March 2020, our libraries shut down and couldn't use their programming rooms for programs. And then, as Dave says, they reopened, right, May, June, but they were still not having programs in their libraries. And so what started as a programming outlet for libraries with Rhody Radio sort of merged into very similar to what Downtown was doing, conversations with our neighbors around the state who have cool stories to tell, which is kind of what programming in libraries tries to do, is to share important information about like how to avoid scams and filing your taxes and writing a will for, yourself or your loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
Those sort of informative things, but also the fun things, going to a concert at your library, or just kind of hearing about someone in your town who's doing a really cool thing, sharing their really cool thing. And so we were sort of curating these experiences with people that you maybe didn't know were in your backyard. No, I mean, not your literal backyard, but right next door to you. We think it's a really easy merge for the two of these projects to come together. We talk to a lot of the same people, or we're interested in talking to a lot of the same people, and have these conversations. And Rhody Radio also had Rhody Recommends, which we were trying to share, what were we reading, watching, listening to, loving. And so now we get to do that every episode, which is a lot of fun. Lauren, is there anything else you want to add about Rhody Radio?
I mean, you pretty much covered it. But the other thing is that Dave was on Downtime and also Rhody Radio.
Oh, yes.
And so,
we're making him do double duty.
Yeah, now he's only on one podcast, which I'm sure is a lot easier.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it makes perfect sense to just combine it into one statewide podcast where library workers from anywhere around the state can also contribute and tell us about what's going on in their corner of the state.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's a really good pitch for anybody listening who is maybe working in a library in any capacity. You do not need to be a degreed librarian to participate in Overdoing It. If you would like to play guest host for any episode ever, we welcome you to contact our creative team, and we can give you the bones of the script and help you record with somebody cool in your neighborhood that you want to talk to about what they're reading, loving, and doing right now in their lives.
So I think we kind of got to my question about what is Overdoing It by explaining what is kind of the impetus for merging both of these projects. But I think Emily made a good point, is we kind of were moving towards kind of doing the same things to begin with. Like we ultimately, with those projects, wanted to connect with the community. And then, as most librarians that I know, once you find that community resource, you want to share it with the people who you think need that community resource. And we found that making podcasts has been a really great way to do that. I know when we started talking to more community members for downtime, like when things were opening back up and we were kind of back to work and pivoted in that way, that's at least when I felt like we really hit our stride and when I felt like we really were doing something that I was really proud of and that I thought was important. Not to make making a podcast sound like so grandiose, but that I thought it was good work that we were doing. So
Yes.
yeah, it just seemed natural to everyone on this call right now, since we were kind of moving towards similar goals, that we combined our effort and our energy, and that we hopefully, with the help of library workers who are listening, spread the love and spread some of the work and responsibility of making this podcast out amongst the state, so it can be something that the state library community can really have ownership over. Right? That's the ideal scenario.
Very much. And I think being the link between the two pod projects, Rhody Radio and Downtime, I think we were both thinking about the longevity of the projects and thinking about the pride that I've taken in working with all of you and making over 400 episodes of podcast. Like, it's bonkers how much podcast we've made. For Tayla and I and our creative team at Cranston Public Library making Downtime, if any one of us left for whatever reason, like if Tayla left Cranston Public Library, the show would just end. And so all of that pride in something that we were creating, like, we wouldn't continue making it. You know, it's what would happen to a project. It would end, which is a bummer. Conversely, Rhody Radio was designed from the beginning to bring in programming ideas from everyone in the state. And certainly for our 2023, it was primarily the three of us, Lauren, Emily, and I, making our episodes. And it's almost like the ask for episode partners to come in and try to make something with us. It was so freeform and open-ended that perhaps it was daunting to somebody that was like, oh, make an episode of podcast. What do I know about podcast? And so what this merger does is it takes the format that we'd been working at Downtime, which is 3 questions. What have you been reading? What have you been watching? And what are you into? Like a very defined request from our guest hosts and eventual creative team members out there. And a script that just is really kind of like plug and play from a certain point of view. And what Rhody Radio has is that statewide reach. You know, so we're not asking people who don't work in Cranston to contribute to the Cranston podcast, but we're taking that format to a statewide audience, and also a statewide audience of collaborators, which is really exciting. And then I think another thing that came out of conversations is we had been looking for the past 4 years. And we've been looking at these projects as programming. And I think where we've come to with realizations putting Overdueing It together, it's really library outreach. And it's a combination of us providing outreach for people in our community to talk to them, but it's also outreach for the library. And what is the library doing? We have all participated in Lit Arts RI podcast meetups, and the number of people that are just like, oh, you're doing this and you're librarians, that's really cool. The number of times people are like, I love the library and here's why. And realizing that, like, you know, that's what this is too. It's like libraries, we can join in this space and be a part of a completely different community, but also still library workers, and connect the podcast community of Rhode Island, which is very robust and active, with the library community, which is equally active and doing things in their communities. So again, you know, just to continue to say that, it's just seemed like a natural fit to kind of combine the efforts to one thing and then create something that would outlast any of us, you know. And then you would have the pride of, you know, Tayla going on to be the director at a giant library someplace else, but be able to see the Overdueing It project continuing and, you know, continue to have that pride in something that you created and started is really exciting, even as we go on to new things.
Yeah, one day maybe we want to be listeners, right,
yes,
Dave?
Yes, I would love to be a listener. That's exactly right. So it's an exciting opportunity to kind of, again, fresh start, create something new that will outlast all of us, and then be able to sit back and take pride in the great work other people continue to do.
So I think we hit all the major points, but is there anything else that we want our audience to know before we wrap up?
I want our non-library listeners to think about, if you have a cool story to share, to reach out to us and come be a guest on our podcast. And come talk to us about what you're reading, what you're watching, and what you're doing.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. We've got our contact information is going to be in the show notes. It's overdoingitpod@gmail.com is our email address. Just reach out and say, hey, again, having done this for 4 years, I firmly believe that everyone has something interesting to say. I have never met anybody and talked to anybody on either of these podcasts that did not have something interesting to say. And so we are a venue for you to say it, and you to say it to your neighbors in the state. So yeah, please feel free, join us.
And also, audiobooks count as reading. And also, if you haven't been reading anything, that's fine too. So don't not contact us because you don't want to tell us that you haven't been reading anything, because that's completely fine.
Yes.
We can ask you instead what you've been borrowing at your library. And if you want to be a guest, but you haven't been going to your library, you can go right before we record, and you can tell us what you borrowed most recently.
Yeah.
Graphic novels are also reading?
Yes. Graphic novels are books.
Yep.
Graphic novels are books?
Yep. Audiobooks are books.
And they are reading. They're real books. Yeah, we'll just get that out of the way at the top. Audiobooks are reading.
Amen.
Graphic novels are reading.
Magazines are reading.
Yep.
I just really want to also say that.
Yeah.
You know, please come talk to me about your celebrity gossip magazines, because I'm out of the loop.
Yeah.
Bring us all the hot goss.
Tell us all the hot goss. Unless it's very invasive to that person and their personal privacy to tell us the hot goss. Then don't.
Overdoing it, line in the sand. Everyone deserves personal privacy. That's a core tenet of librarianship.
That's true. All right. So we will be wrapping up Overdoing It with a segment we call The Last Chapter, where we talk about a library or bookish related question. And since this episode was all about our two podcast projects merging, I thought I would ask you all today, what two pieces of fiction would you like to see merged together?
So there's an artist that I love named Brandon Bird, and he does like pop culture mashups. And so the first thing that came to my mind, and it's hanging right here next to me, it says, what if Frasier joined the Fantastic Four? And then it's, the Human Torch, the Invisible Woman, Captain Mr. Fantastic, and the Thing jumping out. And then right in the middle is Frasier Crane from Frasier saying, watch out, evil, I'm listening. And so just like something like that just mashes up two popular things and makes a third new popular thing.
I don't know if everyone knew this, but I just found out that Frasier is a spin-off of Cheers, because Frasier was Sam's therapist in Cheers.
Yep.
So to once again tie it all together, that's actually three things combined, because then you'd be combining Cheers into that universe as well.
That's right.
Imagine the Fantastic Four walk into a bar.
Thing.
Perfect.
That's great. I actually love that. I'm going to piggyback on you combining and add the Cheers universe into the Marvel universe.
Nice.
I like that.
How about you, Emily?
I'm going to walk us back to earlier in this conversation in which I outed myself as a staunch Gilmore Girls rewatcher. So if you don't know, there are a few characters on Gilmore Girls. One left to do a different project, and one sort of just conveniently didn't have much of a role anymore when they also started a new project. So the first one is very sad. Elaine had a boyfriend who went away and became Seth on the OC, which is also of its time, but was also something I watched a lot of. And the other one, Jared Padalecki, famous Team Dean in Gilmore Girls. So I just looked at the dates just to make sure. Gilmore Girls ran from 2000 to 2007. Supernatural ran from 2005 to End Time Doesn't Matter, but it's for 2 years. There was some overlap. So, I think that a Dean Supernatural tie-in to Gilmore Girls spin-off episode would have been hilarious. And I think if I could go back and make that happen, that would be a lot of fun. Obviously, we can't do it now. Remakes never work for me. But yeah, I think that would have been a really cool crossover episode.
I never really got into Supernatural, but Supernatural did have like some crossover episodes, right? With other franchises and stuff.
You know what? That's a great point. Probably because it feels like very much of that genre of show, and also they were on a major network, so that makes sense. But to be fair, I caught episodes of Supernatural on TV, and maybe even like after afterwards as reruns.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't a strong Supernatural fan. I just know the general gist of the show. So I don't know. They may have done other crossovers, but I'm going to guarantee you they didn't do a Gilmore Girls crossover because I think I would have known about it. And which way, I don't really know.
And they're staunchly different vibes.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And also, Jared Padalecki is not Dean on Supernatural, but his brother is Dean. And so I think that would have been really confusing. But like maybe that would have made it even funnier. We don't know. We didn't explore it.
No, I'm Dean.
Yeah, that's I guess what I'm trying to get at is like which direction would you want the crossover? Would you want it to be that like Lorelai and Rory somehow ended up part of some weird supernatural goings on and so their characters were on Supernatural? Or would you have wanted like Dean, the character from Supernatural, shows up and is like Sam, and then Jared Padalecki is like, what do you mean? I'm Dean. And like that he goes to Stars Hollow because, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's colonial Connecticut, so there's definitely some haunted shit somewhere.
Absolutely. I mean, like, to be fair, probably Richard and Emily's houses. Haunted.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That is on some burial grounds for sure. I think that it would have made, to me, it would have made more sense for there to be supernatural goings on in Stars Hollow or the Gilmore Girls realm in which, Sam and Dean show up. And I think it would be funnier. It wouldn't be like, oh, Sam. It would be, oh, Dean. And he would be like, I'm not Dean. Like, right?
Yeah.
The other
like, I'm not Dean, he's Dean. And then it's like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And they're just like never in the same scenes at the same time. Yeah, that could be funny. I've been in and out a long time reader of fan fiction and also in and out writing of. I love a good gender swapped AU. Usually it's to put more strong female characters into certain narratives. So like was always a woman the whole time. And one of my favorite Daredevil fan fictions was like Matt was Madeline Murdoch, nicknamed Maddie, the whole time. It was very interesting because I think it brought up things about the blind experience that did not come up in the show. I don't know if they were like, assuming that the author wasn't blind, so I don't know if it was coming from within the community, but I'm assuming not. But I know the talked about like, how do you do your hair? How do you do your makeup? Which is like stuff that didn't come up in the show because Matt Murdock was just like, Matt Murdock put on red glasses, ready to leave house. But like is a thing that is part of blind people who identify as women or femme, like part of their experience. So I thought it was very interesting. And I think in general, those are very interesting AUs because it just brings a whole dynamic to that fandom that we weren't thinking about before. Like, what is it like to be a woman in this particular context or that context? Like you think of fandoms that don't have a ton of women characters, like the Lord of the Rings. We don't really know a lot of what the woman's experience of Middle Earth was like. So I like when authors kind of take it upon themselves to be like, I will tell you. I love a good gender swap AU.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for joining me, and thank you everyone for listening. Overdoing It is proud to be a resident partner of the Rhode Island Center for the Book and brought to you by library staff and community members all around the Ocean State. This project has also been funded in part by the Rhode Island Office for Library and Information Services. If you'd like to respond to our last chapter question or just reach out to the show, you can send us an email at overdoingitpod@gmail.com. And that's overdue like your library books, or find us on Instagram at overdoingitpod. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify because it helps reach more Rhode Islanders. Thank you for listening, and this has been another episode of Overdoing It, the Rhode Island Library Podcast. We're overdoing it, but you're doing just fine. Oh, what is our new sign up for the show? I closed that tab. Hold on. Okay.